Hello, it's Easter time, and for many of us this will mean egg hunts and lots of chocolate. But what is Easter really about? Why do we celebrate it, and when did it start? This is what we're going to be sharing with you today. But in order to do that, we're going to need to tell you a story about a man from many, many years ago who was about to be betrayed. This man's name was Jesus, and you've probably heard of him. At the point we're joining the story, Jesus has 12 really close friends who have been with him for the last 3 years through thick and thin. They're coming to the big city, Jerusalem, for the Passover festival. They all arrive in Jerusalem hot and sweaty from a long journey. Back in those days, people used to wear sandals instead of shoes, and because the roads were basically made out of mud and sand, their feet used to be absolutely covered in this stuff and really disgusting. So, when they found a room to eat and rest from their long journey, someone needed to wash everyone's feet. This was easily the worst job that someone could have, but Jesus, to everyone's surprise, washed his friends' disgusting feet. This was an act of total humility and love. Jesus then went on to teach them about loving one another and how important this is. Then, totally unexpectedly, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." The disciples, Jesus' 12 friends, were all totally shocked. They all started looking at each other in total disbelief. You have to remember that they'd all been on the road together for 3 years. They'd all given up everything to follow Jesus. Jesus then revealed that he knew who it was, and it was Judas. He told him that he was free to go and do what he had planned. After this, the disciples went out to one of the gardens nearby, and soon enough, Judas returned with a band of soldiers by his side to arrest Jesus. Despite being totally innocent, Jesus chose not to resist and not to argue. Even when Peter, one of the disciples, attacked one of the guards with his sword, Jesus told Peter to put his sword away and totally healed the guard who Peter had attacked. Jesus was then taken away, and the disciples, his friends, scattered. Jesus was going to be put on trial. You see, the thing about Jesus that made people dislike him so much, and the reason why these people had this plot against him, was that he had claimed that he was the Son of God. This means that those who believed him were drawn to him and what he did and said, but those that didn't believe him really hated him because they thought he was a liar. C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, famously said about Jesus, "Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse." So all these people who hated Jesus claimed he was lying and tried to convince Pilate, who was in charge at the time, to have Jesus killed. The problem was that Pilate couldn't find anything wrong with Jesus, but when Pilate said he thought he was innocent, the crowd just shouted louder. Pilate asked Jesus if he had anything to say for himself, but he wouldn't say a word. Jesus was totally silent, despite having done nothing wrong. Eventually, Pilate gave in to the crowd, despite not really thinking that Jesus was guilty at all. Jesus was going to be crucified. While this was all happening, Peter, one of the disciples, was in the courtyard watching from a distance. It was the middle of the night and getting quite cold, so he and a few others were gathered around a fire to keep warm whilst they watched on. One of the girls around the fire asked him if he was one of Jesus' disciples, and Peter quickly said no. Then another person around the fire also asked him the same question, and he again pretended that he didn't know Jesus. Then once more, a third time, someone asked him, and he denied ever knowing Jesus. Jesus was now totally abandoned, was beaten up and mocked by the guards who were about to kill him. Then they took Jesus away to a hill outside the city called the Skull, where criminals were crucified and left to die for everyone to see. When they arrived, they tied Jesus down and then nailed his hands and feet to the cross before lifting him up. While this was happening, Jesus was praying that the people who were doing this would be forgiven. Whilst Jesus was up on the cross, some amazing things happened. The sun stopped shining for a whole 3 hours. There was an earthquake, And then finally, Jesus said, "It is finished," and he died. One of the men who crucified him, after seeing all this, said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Jesus was then taken away and buried. The religious leaders, who wanted to be sure that the disciples wouldn't try any funny business, put a group of 12 soldiers on guard of the tomb day and night. At this point, you might be wondering why this is something that Christians celebrate at all. You see, the story doesn't actually end here. Although the disciples had either forgotten or always misunderstood, Jesus had been predicting this for a long time. In fact, it had been predicted hundreds and hundreds of years earlier by a man called Isaiah, amongst others. This isn't the end of the story. It was the third day after Jesus' death, and some women were going to the tomb in hope that they could pay their respects with herbs and spices. This is similar to how we might leave flowers at a grave of someone we love today. However, when they got there, the enormous boulder that covered the tomb had been moved, and Jesus wasn't inside. The women were afraid and couldn't figure out what had happened. Then an angel appeared and told them that Jesus had come back to life. Jesus actually appeared to these women and all the disciples later on, as well as about 500 others. He showed them the holes in his hands and feet where the nails had been and explained to them why he had to die and rise again. He said that he died and rose again so that we might be forgiven and be able to have a relationship with God. This means that when Jesus died on the cross, he wasn't dying because he had done anything wrong. We know he was innocent, but he was dying in our place. We have all done awful things, and this means that we aren't good enough to have a relationship with God and to live life to the full. But Jesus has washed us clean of our sin. In the same way that he washed his friends' disgusting feet, he can wash us clean too. If you aren't a Christian but want to be clean, it isn't hard. All you need to do is ask Jesus. He has done the rest. He can make us clean. You can say a really simple prayer, which I'm about to say now. And if you'd like to, you can repeat it after me and simply say Amen at the end to make it your own. Jesus, I am sorry that I do bad things and that has made me dirty and mucky. Thank you for dying and rising again so that anyone, including me, can call out to you and be forgiven. Please forgive me. If you have prayed that prayer, there's no pressure, but we would really love to hear from you so we can encourage you and support you. You can do that by messaging us on Facebook or by emailing us. The links to do that should be in the description below. Otherwise, we all hope you have a really wonderful Easter and get a chance to reflect on what Jesus has done for us.